Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tokyo College. Thank you for joining us this afternoon's seminar on the intersection of artificial intelligence and digital health. I'm Chen Li. I'm a postdoc fellow at Tokyo College, and I will be the moderator of today's session. We are privileged to have here with us today Professor Simo Hosio from Tokyo College to share his work and insights about the complexities and challenges of leveraging digital health technology in real-world health promotion. Following Professor Simo's presentation, we will invite Professor KUNIYOSHI Yasuo from the Next Generation AI Research Center of the University of Tokyo to share some comments and questions for discussion. My own work also focuses on digital health and behavioral intervention for HIV/STI prevention, and using crowdsourcing strategies for community engagement. Like many of you in this room webinar, I'm very excited to have this chance to learn from the two professors about the future of crowdsourced healthcare and digital healthcare. So during this webinar, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to chat in the chat box or submit through the Q&A function, and we will address them during the discussion session. For a little bit more background, Professor Hosio is a social computing scientist and received his PhD in computer science and engineering from the University of Oulu in Finland. He currently holds several distinguished positions, including Academy Research Fellow at the Academy of Finland, Associate Professor at the University of Oulu, and now a visiting professor at Tokyo College. So without further ado, I will give the mic to Professor Hosio, please.
Thank you so much for the kind words and the introduction. And also, I want to extend big thanks to Tokyo College and really the entire University of Tokyo for hosting me here. It's been fantastic some months here, and I hope the good times continue. So without any more background about that, I want to jump directly into the topic of the day. I have a lot of ideas and thoughts I want to share today. Some are based on more popular culture, some are maybe just common sense, some are weird thinking, but I will try to also weave in a lot of research coming from both of the lab back home in Finland and also from the people and labs and researchers I've been privileged to collaborate with here in Japan. So let me share something. Here we go. Are we screen sharing? We are. So today, the formal topic is exploring the future of something I call crowdsourced healthcare. And the interesting part about future is that future is always a story. And we really cannot, or anyone who is saying that they know what the future holds is either overconfident or lying for some underlying reason. And we know this because if you think back on your own life, a lot of the stories and beliefs that you had about the future have been proven as lies. As recently as just some years ago, like we all know what happened with the pandemic. There was a lot of things that nobody could have anticipated, and especially how humans behaved as a result of the pandemic. So smart biologists, they knew that there is a pandemic coming, but nobody could predict how governments and humans at large would behave. Now, the way that we construct these future stories or the stories of the future, for most of the people who are consumers, these are stories molded by popular culture, such as, for example, Star Trek, aired at 1966 for the first time and situated somewhere in 2266. This was a really, really popular series that shaped the understanding of what the future will look like. Now, obviously, we might be guessing that, well, it's not going to happen in just 200 years, all of the fantastic events that were portrayed in this series, but there is something peculiar in this series. Take, for example, the tricorder. This little gizmo here, the tricorder, is something that is capable of sensing, recording, and computing. Now, there have been a lot of highly paid efforts in replicating some of the functionalities of the tricorder, but what comes the closest perhaps to the tricorder is actually the thing in your pocket right now. If you think of the iPhone, It is indeed a multifunctional handheld device that can perform environmental scans to a degree. It records data and it does data analysis very efficiently with all the new chipsets. Hence the word tricorder, 3 functions, sensing, recording, computing. I mean, we have this already. So some of the stories that we tell through popular culture, they come true phenomenally well. But some of even the best guesses that we have of today turn out to be completely false. And we can only connect the dots afterwards. Like, it turned out that the Earth is not flat. It turned out that everything is not earth, water, air, and fire. And it turned out that, you know, there weren't any canals on Mars that indicated civilization. These were really good guesses at the time. So it only makes sense to also assume that right now we have a lot of stories that we tell to ourselves that are not true. So I repeat, we can only connect the dots in the future. So before we go into any deeper to the actual topic of today, let's rewind properly. Let's rewind to 1770. There's a wonderful gizmo that was a real gadget in 1770, and that was not a story. And that was the Turk. So the Turk was built by a Hungarian author who wanted to impress an empress, Maria Theresa of Austria. And this was a machine that supposedly played chess. And as you can see, there was actually a person inside, and this thing wasn't really playing chess. But it was so skillfully crafted and portrayed that it was touring the world for 84 years. 84 years, defeating some people like Benjamin Franklin or Napoleon during these tours. And there's a specifically funny encounter with Napoleon that I want to mention. So Napoleon tried to cheat the machine, making an illegal move, but the machine shook its head and undid Napoleon's move. And this is like incredible details of this kind of real events that happened. Now, what this is a machine with human inside. And this is another historical sort of historical fact that came true, because now we have crowdsourcing, which is literally the concept of a machine with human inside, or a lot of humans inside. So crowdsourcing has been one of the big research areas of my group in the past, and just a little brief explanation of the concept itself. So basically, we take a big chunk of digital work, some kind of work that can be distributed in small pieces. And these pieces are then done by hundreds, thousands, sometimes even by tens of thousands of people. And these people, we need access to them somewhere. So there has been born this kind of a major business of different labor marketplaces that are now catering a sort of application programming interface into human cognition. So if you think of a typical work for a platform like this, it could be, for example, labeling images for the use of machine learning or artificial intelligence. We might have tens of thousands of images, and we need to know whether there are cats or dogs or dinosaurs in those photos. And the way to do that is to parallelize the work and send one image at a time to thousands of workers through these marketplaces and platforms. And this is the business of crowdsourcing, one branch of gig labor. Now, gig labor, these kind of small jobs around the world, there is a lot of this type of work, and the crowds are just growing. So some of the good people at Oxford Internet Institute have been mapping this kind of online labor platform situation, and already some years ago, they had a sophisticated estimate of 140 million registered workers in this platform. And that's only what you can find. There's a lot of these platforms that operate in the global south or African countries that do not disclose how many registered people they have at their disposal. So there is a lot of human people registered on these platforms, all serving the great overlord of AI. So obviously AI has a lot of potential, and we will need to rely on many things AI in our future for humanity to thrive. It is our best bet against many of the problems that we are facing. But it relies on these humans inside. So I want to highlight the role of humans in these machines that we are building. Some of these platforms offer services like image enrichment, data tagging, image classification. We need all these to build our smart applications. Moderation, a very common task online. But then when you start to look deeper into these platforms, some of the things going on in these platforms doesn't quite click the right way. So for example, in the case of video moderation, sometimes there are tasks where your task is to see what kind of videos are, for example, tailored for, like, if there's any violence in the videos. So moderation. And this is a nasty job. It is not a job that you would want to do all day long. Yet there are a lot of people who have no other choice to do that. So we can read about these articles every now and then for people doing this kind of work for not a very good salary. And it's not good for people's mental health. A permanent nightmare when you are a Pinterest moderator. And here's an interesting one. OpenAI. We all have tried now ChatGPT and we hail it as the big modern success story, which it is. But we pay little attention to the fact that in order to publish ChatGPT, the company had to use these services for weeding out toxic language, and for the price of what? Less than $2 per hour. So it doesn't quite stand the scrutiny of modern style of working, especially in the countries where these services are being launched from. So not a lot of money for very, very nasty type of work. That's the kind of harsh reality for many of the people who are fueling our AI advances in the public. And it doesn't stop there necessarily. So there's a lot of other problems with these platforms. Obviously, there is no worker onboarding necessarily. The platforms do not really care too much about the workers. There's no personal growth opportunities, no healthcare, no psychological support in many cases, no labor unions. Whether you think labor unions are good or bad, well, still the fact is that they do a lot of good for the employees sometimes, but they don't exist. No workplace benefits, etc., etc. So we have at our hands a lot of these platforms that have a lot of potential in form of human cognition on demand, but we are not using it the way that we probably should if we try to act as ethical operators and with the best of these people in our minds. So the opportunity comes there. There's a global access at our fingertips right now. We don't need to build anything to get access to these people. There are hundreds of millions of people across these platforms that are accessible to anyone with credit card and skills to deploy tasks online. So what we are looking at with some of our work is how to use these platforms for not this kind of simple repetitive work for training AIs, but for figuring out something related to better healthcare for anyone in the future. So tailoring treatment plans, for example, based on crowdsourced data, or trying to gather some kind of global health insights without having to try to reach out to a lot of people with traditional laborious ways, but actually simply using these platforms that are already out there. So it's a bit of a hidden opportunity where some of these platforms have literally like hundreds of different languages and countries available for us to build on. So what I'm looking at is this kind of a 3-layer model, which I am trying to build for my own thinking support. And we follow this in a lot of our research. So the fundamental step is to figure out better data management ways. How do we compensate people fairly for their data? How do we store data and reuse data in an ethical and better way for future healthcare services? Then, what kind of tools do we need to actually collect this data? So many of these platforms where we find these people, they have fairly limited facilities to gather data because they are optimized for simple repetitive tasks that the modern AI technologies and the companies need. So a lot of the data formats that we would need to build healthcare services are not compatible with those. So we have to build some kind of software layers in order to capture that data. And then as the kind of spearhead, which is more visible to the end users and the general public, is what kind of healthcare solutions can we build as a result of the two first layers. So capturing data and storing data and then making some kind of inferences for those. So I'm not going to talk a lot about each of the layer. I'm just going to mention briefly a couple of examples. So the first layer on data management. The data that you and I generate every day of our lives is precious, but we kind of give it away. We all know that we give it in exchange for free services from big tech companies, but it's all blurred in a sense that we don't necessarily understand how precious our data is. So the data you generate daily through your smartphones, all kinds of sensors, even your digital traces online, it's all data that somebody is monetizing. So what we are looking at is to figure out fair ways to compensate people for their data. And for example, there is this one movement originating in Finland called My Data. It's a very interesting movement. If you want to see mydata.org, that's a great resource to start diving deeper into these issues. So we're trying to figure out better ways to store and share data ethically, people's personal health data. And I'm leaving a couple of papers at the bottom as well if you're interested in looking at more academic literature on the topic. And then the big opportunity here is cultural differences. So we can enrich data from different cultural perspectives and look at it through the eyes of different cultures. And this is sometimes something that we forget to do. So through these platforms, we have access to different cultures and ways of thinking. So one of the interesting questions when we are talking about, for example, future healthcare or well-being, what does it even mean to be well? Different cultures have an entirely different understanding what it means for a person to be well. In some cultures, you have to have a lot of personal liberties, freedom to do this and that in order to be well. Somewhere else, it is that people leave you alone and you just have the basic human rights. Some cultures where things are even worse, the definition of well-being can be something totally different. So if we are trying to build this kind of global insights or trying to tackle global questions, we need to be able to examine these questions from very, very different lenses, cultural lenses, pretty much critically. So, for example, in our case, with our research, we have been looking at the differences between the perceptions of Japanese people and European people, or actually UK people in this case, on privacy. And already in there, it's very clear that there are different understandings of what you are supposed to be sharing online or not. So these kind of issues then trickle down into the whole paradigm of data management. How do you manage data? Or can you even build a system that can manage data ethically and somehow morally so that it would support different cultures as well? And then what kind of tools do we need to capture data in order to be able to build these healthcare services? This is becoming so easy now. Like I already mentioned, the personal tricorder that we have, that's so highly programmable these days, and the sensors are so rich and combinatorial. So the smartphone that we have is full of different sensors that can tell things about your state of health. Something as simple as your mobility traces, like how much do you move and where do you move? If we deploy enough of those traces, or if we deploy machine learning algorithms to those traces, we can detect things like deteriorating mental health because your mobility patterns move. If we know how you typically contact your friends, when and who you typically contact, we can deploy machine learning algorithms to likewise detect that there are some anomalies going on in your life. And obviously things like pulse meters, heart rate interval, everything that we can record with those kind of sensors, they tell directly about people's health states. So we have these sensors already, but the data, we are giving it away to the vendors, and we are not actually capitalizing on that on a personal level, which in a certain ethical sense, we should be able to do because it's our data. So for this purpose, there are different kind of platforms that academics have been building. One of these has been built by our people at Oulu. So there's awareframework.com, and then we have some colleagues in Denmark building CARP. And these are platforms to capture this data that is typically hidden inside the mobile phone, and it goes only to the vaults of the big tech operators of those phones. But these platforms can be used to capture a lot of that data for research use. So that's a good pointer there. Then we have these off-the-shelf tools like the Oulu Ring, likewise from Finland, which is measuring a lot of data that you can export from the platform to research use to a degree at least. So they offer ways to get some of this data. So these things enable a lot of nice research. And again, an example. So we've been using something like mobile crowdsourcing for tracking the progress of Parkinson's disease. So what you can do is you can build, for example, mobile games that people play daily, and you use the accelerometer and the gyroscope of the phone to detect how the effect of medication, for example, wanes. So the phone can automatically tell you that, oh, your tremors are now slowly coming back, and it can help people to take their medication. But likewise, it communicates to the caretakers the adherence of people to these medications. So there's a lot of different things that we can do with this. We have been also tracking these sensors a lot to track something called digital biomarkers, so that we can try to guess people's mood, or basically if there's like an onset of depression coming along because of some of the digital biomarkers change. Other examples are, of course, this sleep and pain. So we have been working a little bit with Oulu to try to figure out different kind of systems to track how to mitigate people's pain. Again, sleep and pain go hand in hand. So there's always this classic problem, like which comes first? Are you in pain because you didn't sleep, or did you not sleep because you are in pain? So we can try to build this kind of systems to advise people on the right ways to sleep to mitigate their pain. Now, these are a bit more like sensor-oriented applications. They work a lot on hardware sensors. And we are also interested in really building something concretely for the end users that they can, in an interactive way, use for themselves. And this is, for example, one of our very recent studies where we built a machine based on hundreds of Parkinson's disease patients who graciously gave us a lot of suggestions on how to self-care for Parkinson's disease. So this was just recently published this year. And I'm going to try to show a short video on this. Let's see if this works. So it's very, very simple system. Just instructions. And then we have a few sliders, like what criteria would you like to use to find self-care techniques? I want it to be cheap. I want it to be effective. And it finds you best matches based on an underlying database of thousands of reviews to different crowdsourced mechanisms that people have been using to self-care for their Parkinson's disease. So there are things like, book group or swimming or using this and that kind of techniques there. And there are hundreds of different techniques that people can try to discover using this kind of a simple mechanism. So the result screen will look something like this. And well, I'm going to say one more word about the criteria. So many times when we consult the formal healthcare system, there is a set of techniques that doctors are allowed to recommend. And they are largely based on peer-reviewed research, and one single metric, which is effectiveness. Do they work? But there are other human factors that are often not considered, like, for example, your personality. So some of the techniques that you can try for things like pain or Parkinson's disease, they have, for example, a degree of sociality. Is it something that you can do if you are an introvert or extrovert? So these are factors that we can take into account when we build our own systems to recommend treatments to people. And I also will have to note here that these are not meant to be, of course, to replace any formal therapy or hospital visits. These are always done in collaboration, and this is more like an information search machine rather than a diagnostic tool or a treatment. So, for example, in these cases, we have been collaborating with the local hospitals and just doing this study with the doctors themselves to check out, like, what can we bring to the table with this kind of crowdsourced systems. But anyway, these account for a lot of different human factors that the formal treatments often do not. There's a special case. There's something that we've been focusing a lot more lately is mental well-being or mental health. Depends on how you want to word that. And there are a couple of reasons to do that. So first seems to be like there is an increased demand. So almost all the time you read news about how there is an increased demand for mental health services, and it just seems to be getting worse. And then we have these major disruptive events like the pandemic was, which made it a lot worse for a lot of youngsters, especially. And then we have new kinds of insecurities coming, like people are scared of losing their jobs because of AI. Climate change is a big thing, especially for the younger audiences. So these new disruptions are all just compounding the already deteriorating situation. So we've been doing a lot of work on mental health, and here especially we've been using something called conversational agents or chatbots, for example. So we're trying to figure out the best ways to offer the best user experience with different kind of chatbots. For example, by trying to explore different personalities of the chatbots, like how will they best work for treating mental health. And this is joint work between some of the colleagues here at the University of Tokyo as well. So it's been leading into something bigger and better all the time. So a lot of this work is now ongoing, and we are starting new examinations on this front. And to this end, we have this kind of culturally adaptive study line in mind. So we have a bilateral funding for this between the JSPS here and the Academy of Finland for mutual research exchange, basically. So we're able to send young researchers back and forth to start new investigations on this front. And we already have a pretty large data set of people from Finland and the UK, especially from the higher education cohort, to base our investigations on. So we have 1,000 people sharing what kind of issues trouble them these days and what kind of help can they find. And this is all open-ended data that we can use as fuel to build better conversational agents for this specific population. So we're building chatbots. Now, this is where we can again take it a bit easier. So I'm not going to talk about research now. I'm going to talk about chatbots. Chatbots are just glorified tape recorders. This is Michio Kaku's nice comment some time ago, and I found this very funny. I think it's actually correct in many ways. But think about this. Chatbots like this ChatGPT, they essentially don't come up with anything new, but they predict words based on what has already been said. But that's exactly what the Library of Alexandria was. And was it not a marvelous thing? It contained scrolls that were always the same scrolls that somebody had written. But the library itself was a wonderful thing, even though it contained things that stay the same. And by the same analogy, you can say that it was a broken record. Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd sold 45 million copies. Probably a lot more, but that's the recorded amount. But it's a broken record by the same analogy. You play it the next time, it plays exactly the same way. Maybe a little bit depending on what kind of stereo system you have, but it's the same thing all over and over again. And these are wonderful masterpieces. So here, sometimes I just think that sometimes all we really need is a glorified tape recorder to make sense of something that has already been said, but to make sense of it in the correct way for the correct people. We are able to personalize knowledge that we already have captured so that it resonates well with the end user, just like music does. It does it differently with every single end user because they bring their own life experiences and their own human factors using HCI language. They bring their own human factors to the interaction. So I have nothing personally against glorified tape recorders, even though I agree with the definition to a degree for sure. So then a bit more philosophical point as well. So sometimes when we are dealing with trying to build the future or even just to dream about the future, in academia, we start to struggle with these kind of tensions between, are we doing pure science? Are we perhaps trying to be activists when we deal with things like pools of humans in some platforms? So is our job simply to study those circumstances, or is our job perhaps to try to do something about it? So do we cross the line into activism? And then sometimes when you're having a really bad day, you think that you are only like dreaming and you can't really do anything about anything. Some of these dreams are fueled by facts that we tend to be quite under-resourced compared to the big venture capital funded companies doing similar work. Like when we publish a crowdsourced study, we tend to be proud when we have hundreds of people in our sample. And then we have these companies like Find My Patients or Stuff That Works, where they have 850,000 members because they are playing with a lot bigger resources. Or companies like Oulu, of course, we're super happy to be collaborating with them. But again, sometimes it feels like, what new can you as an academic bring to the table when they have all the data already? And they're not going to give it to you that easy. So you have to think really hard as an academic, like what is your meaningful contribution to the world? Or would it just make sense that you go and work for these companies because they already have, or it seems that they already have the tools to have a bigger impact? Those are the bad days when you think that you're only dreaming. Now, in the good days, then, what you can do is you can start to figure out fairer ways to orchestrate it all. So maybe there are ways that we can bring these kind of planetary human cognition to research use using new technologies. And we have been building this kind of blue ocean ideas or blue sky ideas of, for example, using the internet to build this kind of a large machines where we have hubs of human cognition that would be donated to science. There are ways to do this. I am 100% sure. We just haven't yet managed to do them. And then, of course, the best way to do anything is to partner with the people who have a say in things. So we have been, for example, having workshops with some people from Amazon, some people from some of these very, very big platforms that have millions of people in their ranks in order to try to together find common ground on what they can actually do so that it still serves their business interests, but that it would also serve sort of our dreams better in terms of improving the well-being of the workers. So it's not like we are actually against each other here. It's just that there are different motives and reasons for different stakeholders to be maintaining and examining these platforms. So these are some of the things that we have been doing in the past. So the question becomes, what is this machine with human insight in the future? So we know that the artificial intelligence solutions that we have today, they are powered deep down inside with humans inside, either as a result of using data that has been generated in good faith, no problem there if it's shared consensually, and it's been scraped from sources that, well, allow scraping. But also, some of the modern advances are executed and built with means that are maybe a little bit more shady. So we need to be figuring out what is the future of these things and do we need to care? This here is Midjourney, the image generators take on a chess-playing automaton in 1770. So it's actually a pretty nice example of what these new AI tools do. So this image did not exist before a couple of days before today. So it's drawn by AI to represent mechanical Turk. So some of these questions we are trying to find out in an event actually exactly 3 weeks from now. So anyone who is still listening at this point, I also invite you warmly to participate if you want. So we are organizing this event called TOHAI, Tokyo Oulu Joint Symposium on Human AI Interaction, where we have several international speakers and also local speakers to give their own take of what the future of human AI interaction is going to bring to the table for all of us. So please check that URL and register if you wish to. It's in 3 weeks from today. And with this final invitation, I actually am happy to conclude my presentation right here. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Hosio, for the great presentation. And now we will invite Professor KUNIYOSHI Yasuo to give a short comment and maybe some questions to Professor Hosio to spark the discussion. Professor KUNIYOSHI Yasuo is the director of the Next Generation AI Research Center and a professor at the Graduate School of Information Science and Technology of the University of Tokyo. His research focuses on developmental cognitive robots, brain information processing, humanoid robots, and many other interesting ICT topics. Now off to you, Professor KUNIYOSHI. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I totally enjoyed the Professor Hosio's very nice presentation. Thank you very much. And I learned a lot from his talk. The first thing I want to do is that, because I'm a AI robotics researcher, I cannot hold myself from, presenting something relevant to, what Dr. Hosio presented. So I want to show some slides. Right. So in the latter part of his talk, he mentioned some chatbot for mental health. And actually, we've done something relevant to this. And I want to show this just to, expand the topic. So AI chatbot for human well-being based on online estimation of the internal state of the user. This work is mainly done by this guy, Satoshi Nakagawa. So this picture shows him and his robot, Sota. And this is his title, QOL-based robot counseling for elderly, QOL improvement. And so briefly, what he built is that he built a system that does a conversation with elderly people based on online estimation of QOL of the user. And the result is that he did an experiment with elderly participants. And he showed some significant effects, like in this graph that shows improved QOL and then reduced negative emotions after a week. So just briefly, this is the core of his system, the QOL estimator. So what the system does is to take audio, visual, and input in the conversation with the elderly user, and then analyze using a machine learning based system, in a multimodal way: vision, facial expression, gaze, head movement, and audio pattern and text information, and then integrate them to estimate the QOL score. There's a globally established scoring system for QOL. Basically, it's usually provided in question and answer sheet form, and then it gives you a score. So the system is trained to match this multimodal input to the QOL score sheet on a number of participants. So then the system can real-time estimates QOL score, and then based on that, it generates such conversation. So like, so it's personalized. So it says like, your scores seems consistent with yesterday, how you're feeling today, or hey, your mental health score has improved and it's good, and things like that. Or suggest something based on cognitive behavioral therapy methods, like taking a walk would be good for you, etc. So that's what it does. And then we did such experiments, 20 participants, and got such data, and then result is as I told. So that was one example of how AI can contribute to chatbot for human well-being, mental health, etc. We are thinking about some further steps. So this was kind of a superficially mapping multimodal input to QOL score, but we are interested in how we can make a system to have a deeper understanding of the user internal state. And here what I'm showing is that we are trying to build a model of internal organs, in this case, a cardiovascular system coupled with the central nervous system, so that the system, we can model human emotion and physiological response. That's very early stage of working, but we are, trying to do this. And further thing is that this is our simulated baby, actually a fetus. And this is generating spontaneous movement and collect sensory data and autonomously learning. So this provides another topic for, not just this kind of system generates data itself actively. So not relying on, human generated data, database, etc. So this can be one interesting topic. Now, finally, about the data issues, particularly on a personal data security. So in Professor Hosio's talk, I was interested in mobile data utilization. One question could be, what is your management regarding the personal data security when you use smartphones, etc., data for healthcare? I can connect some relevant research in our department, actually, in our school. For example, by Koichi Hashida, called the personal data storage. I can explain later, but it's about a new idea about how the user themselves has full control of private data. And there are some research about personal data security, because even though you anonymize the data, still from the data itself, you can reconstruct identity. So you need a very deep considerations about how to protect the personal privacy. So that can be one of my question. Yeah.
So maybe Professor Hosio, you can address the question about the personal data storage.
Yeah, so first of all, it's a great question and it's a huge concern. And third of all, there is definitely not a straightforward answer to that. And that is why we have researchers looking into it, as well as these whole organizations like My Data. So the challenge comes especially like keeping this data safe, stored it safe from a cybersecurity perspective. That is like relatively straightforward. But then when you are trying to grant access to that data, to sell that data, for example, and we are talking about financial gains because we are trying for the end users to be able to get financial gains for their data. That is where the challenges then come from. And I do not definitely have any kind of solution to offer to that. I can only say that some of the things that we are looking at is, for example, like what do people think as even being ethical to be shared? And what are people concerned about? Who are the correct entities, for example, to manage that data? So there are couple of different options. Either the users themselves, but that is like only the very, very tech-savvy people will want to actually store the data themselves. And then when there's a third party storing that data, can that third party be a commercial entity or should it be some kind of a non-profit entity? And then you have European Union bringing in GDPR and everything gets to go in a deadlock for a decade. So it is, I don't think I have any smart answer for that, but it is a huge problem. But at the same time, it's also an opportunity. So
yeah, I understand that it's a difficult issue.
Yeah.
But at some time we discussed in some panel that how AI can help in these issues. And for example, well, it derives from the idea of personal data storage by Hosio. And actually, the basic idea is that you do not rely on some central management organization how to manage your data, but you should take a full control of your data and decide for yourself when to provide data to particular purposes. However, it's really a tough task to assess the risks and decide. So probably AI can offer a personalized decision assistance, like assessment and etc. Or even like consider some legal stuff, etc. to help individuals to cleverly manage their privacy. But, that's a dream.
The large language models definitely have the capacity to navigate a lot of the fine print these days. So terms and conditions of services and even hardware that collect your data. To what degree do you have your own right to that data?
Yeah.
We're talking about off the shelf. So there's a lot of potential in building AI systems that help navigate different jurisdictions and terms and services. And then I think there is one funny thing there going on. We as researchers are quite often so in love with our topics that we forget that most people just don't care. Like, you click accept to everything and it's like, yeah, I have this data, so what? Let me have my Instagram and go away. So that is like what happens very often. So we need to be sensitive also. And actually your point that there might be an AI solution that helps people make these calls for their own good might be very, very useful. I remember a decade ago in Ubicomp, there was a lot of research in easy ways to manage your privacy, like better user interfaces for mobile phones to manage things like how the phone behaves in different spaces and well, simple stuff like even like ringtones and that kind of thing. So maybe once we get that far, we might have this super simple interfaces that just set generic guidelines of this is how I want my data to be used. And when possible, please compensate me for this and this type of data that I willingly share to anyone who is willing to buy the most. So bidding marketplaces, basically it's a bid marketplace. My data is up for grabs. Whoever wants to pay most, get it.
Since we're still on the topic of the personal data storage, we got a very interesting question from the audience. It's from Zhen Du. So they asked, thank you for the very informative session. Do you have any example about using blockchain to store data, which allow data generator to first keep the ownership during the data sharing using trading process, and second, allow the generator to decide which data to share and for how long?
Was that for who?
Maybe either of you.
Well, my answer is at least simple. No, we haven't done anything with blockchain. We have been only blockchains in our past work go to the dreams department. So we have been thinking about it, but we're not familiar with those. I know in European Union, many big projects were funded around blockchain data management probably 6, 7, 8 years ago, but I haven't been following what actually came out as a result of those projects. So it's a bit of unknown territory for me.
Well, blockchain could be used, but it doesn't provide you, how to manage the content. I mean, the privacy, etc. So it can be a tool, but you need additional things, to control the management of the data, right? So, the question is, what kind of system you're going to build on top of that? Yeah.
Blockchains don't account for the human factors. Of course, there is a technical layer that is one problem, but then, humans are one of the hardest part in computer science, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but that is how it goes. So then we still need to tackle the end user and the peculiarities of the humans and their attitudes, cultures, everything that changes so fast, even though if we have the technical part in check. That's right. So.
Thank you. Maybe some of the audience are still needing several seconds to organize their sentences and words. And I'd like to take this advantage to ask a question that I'm very interested in. So I think all of us believe there is a huge potential of AI-based or digital healthcare enabled a tool or technology. But as human society, we're all built based on human interaction and networks. So what are the advantages or disadvantages of virtual healthcare based on your research expertise? And what are some of the ways we can use to mitigate the drawbacks of virtual healthcare?
Well, from my perspective, it all comes down to, first of all, the unfortunate must that we have, which is just that we simply do not have the resources in many countries, the financial resources, economic resources to tackle I don't want to sound too negative, but the kind of impending bad situation that we have because the demands are growing, population is aging, there is not enough of caretakers. So first of all, we have to do something. And then the second one is a bit more delightful or maybe more kind of happy in terms of tone, is that there's a lot of people who prefer to have their needs met with automated solutions and robots and electronic information rather than going to the doctor. For example, in Finland, it's almost like a joke that people want to seek healthcare help only when they are way too late in the process. So in these kind of situations, we will be able to help people sooner and more cost efficiently with automated means or virtual means. It can be even as simple as just like a virtual doctor. Like sometimes we have a human who is just remotely facilitated by good enough equipment. So There's the must angle, and then there's the we can angle. And finally, of course, I mean, we are a species that has come this far because we are curious. Humans are the most curious species on the planet, and I think it's also like our moral duty to explore what we can achieve on this front as well.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I almost completely agree with Professor Hosio. So in Japan as well, so people have some mental barrier in visiting actually the medical doctors for mental health or counseling. And if it's easy accessible over the net, then we think more people can access it at an early stage, which is very, very important. And there are many people, I mean, clinical psychologists, some of them are, and other, medical doctors probably working on to offer services over the net. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy on a web, etc. And I think it's growing. So it's one of the very important way to go. On the other hand, this web-based system is like you have to enter answer to some questions and enter some click buttons, etc. And then it gives you some stereotypical guidance based on the CBT, etc. And there many people think they want to make it more interactive, effective, etc. So the example of chatbot what we showed is one trial to towards such a goal. But when you do it, it's relevant to this Zoom session. When people interact over the net, something is missing, dropping. So which is like it's a little different from really interacting in this physical contact, which is like the multimodal information of like emotional response or heartbeat, things like that is I think if you're close together, you can sort of unconsciously sense it and you can share the mood. But over the net, it becomes really difficult. So similar thing can be said about the computer-based, agents. So currently the agents do not have enough capability to exploit such, detect such internal state. So technically, I think the issue is how we can, overcome that, to really understand the user deeper and provide appropriate feedback depending on the state. So as a researcher, I'm interested in that direction, but also for society, it's a really necessary thing. And the issue is how we can make it more effective and truly, for humans.
Thank you for the great explanation. We have a lot of questions from the audience now. So the first question from Chilan Yang, and so this question is addressed to Professor Hosio. So I'm interested in the idea that different culture or individual may have different definition of being well. I assume some people might not even be aware of our feelings of being well can be influenced by our society. So I wonder, what is your thoughts about making people aware of this? Is there anything crowdsourced data can help with this?
Well, as long as we have access to different cultures, we can start probing these questions. Now, about that specific issue, we haven't done any past work on our own. It is something that we have an opportunity to do now. But there is also very interesting pitfall in this whole idea, because if some cultures don't even have the notion of, for example, the word depressed, it doesn't exist even some languages in the world. So do we really even have any business to then start discussing or exploring the issues of depression in a culture where the whole language doesn't even support the concept? So this is super interesting. I don't know if it's a philosophical or moral question, but there are some things that we probably also want to leave alone. So I think we should be very sensitive to different cultures in this sense, and especially like not to try to impose our own metrics of, for example, well, mental well-being or depression upon cultures where it's understood completely differently. Like, who are we to deploy a PHQ-8 into all cultures on the planet and say that this is now the fair yardstick to gauge what it means to be depressed? Because I don't think it is, even though it has been validated in a paper, but it's still not globally universally acceptable as such. So these are, in a way, these are really annoying problems because you cannot come up with an answer that many people would accept as science, because it's like, it's a soft answer in a sense. But I think it's just a wonderful opportunity for us to explore now this very, very rich different lenses to things that we take as a given many times, like going to very practical details, many times governed by the submission venues where we typically submit our papers, the cultures where those venues have been coming from and born in.
Thank you. And the next question may be addressed to both professors and still about data storage and data security. And so from Professor Naoko Shimazu, she asked, what does national sovereignty mean in the way of this collected and used? National sovereignty.
I'm not entirely sure what the question means.
The question is, what does national sovereignty mean in the way this data are being collected and used? Maybe national security or?
No, I think it's national sovereignty.
Okay.
But still, I think I'm not exactly sure what the question means. National sovereignty, is this something to do with like country-specific regulations, maybe?
Or is it possible for countries to share data across borders?
I think
International collaboration.
that probably depends entirely on the legislation of the countries, right? But there's a lot of like or multinational companies that are handling everyone's data, and we can read almost every month about the new big lawsuits that Google, Meta, and these big companies are getting in different countries because of the way how they handle data.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of this kind of tension now about these big companies being like governing this data far above their kind of jurisdiction that they have. But I don't really actually have any direct answer to that, because I don't really see how national sovereignty can be, you know.
Yeah.
Would you have anything to add? It's a bit tough question.
It's hard to answer. So our next question is, oops, okay, I see. I believe the future developments in technology and research will increase the number of biophysiological indicators that can be utilized and mental health conditions that can be estimated. What are your expectations for the use of biophysical or sociological indicators in the future?
Do you want to answer, or should I?
Oh,
It's a double-edged sword. So this is a line of research that is going ahead in a lightning speed and a lot better all the time. We will have so like precise and small wearable sensors to record everything that is going on in our body on a physiological level. So it will become very, very trivial to sense the changes in our like physiological state and also mental state further down the future. I mean, we are already seeing a certain powerful individual trying to put wires directly into human brains. So it's only a matter of time before these sensors are super good. So that's exciting on one end, but then on the other hand, it also like offers so easy way to just then completely outsource everything to these kind of remote services or technologies, and it becomes very, very compelling to countries, public sector, to simply purchase services from a technology company rather than offer these humans to take care of other humans. And I think the big danger there is, again, this is just a story. I have no clue about how the future will pan out. But I think we are getting too fast, too far ahead of evolution. Humans are still social animals, which are used to tell like stories about their lives around a campfire. And then in the blink of an eye, we go from the campfire into being censored, like not censored, but having sensors in our head to detect what is going on, and then having some artificial intelligence, virtual entity tell us or treat us. I think that transition is going to come so fast that there is a danger of something going wrong. And it sounds like a science fiction movie, but well, weirder things have happened. So
Professor,
nothing to add. Perfect.
Thank you. And we have another comment. I think this is a comment more than a question. So it says, it is important to take medical privacy very seriously. However, if you play cat and mouse, your guard will definitely be broken. Do you have any comment on the comment or?
I like cats.
Cool. And so I actually also very interested in another question. So we are all working in the university environment. We're all working in academia. So in the face of AI-driven or data-driven technology, and as educators working in higher education, what are the skills you would expect your students to have? Or what are the skills or knowledge that you think we should focus on teaching to our like younger generations at a university?
Well, I'm a big fan of AI literacy itself, like trying to understand these underlying algorithms that dictate our lives so much. Not necessarily so much even on like the typical like maths or physics sense of things, but just understanding that there are these invisible hands that are already so much affecting our lives. Like what you see online is not decided by you largely anymore. Things are being fed to you. Amazon, when you go to Amazon, there is a wonderful line of recommendations which are being made like by some invisible algorithm for you. When you go to social media, there is an algorithm trying to take you to a direction. I'm not saying that's some kind of an evil plot that everybody is taken to a bad place or to a good place, but there is an algorithm that is trying to take you somewhere. So just to understand that this is going to be increasingly the case, like your devices are measuring you and something somewhere is going to change in a subtle way because of that. So those kind of larger concepts about how the artificial intelligence driven world works, I think are in a way even more important than like trying to understand how exactly these algorithms work under the hood. We can leave that into the computer scientists and mathematicians.
Professor KUNIYOSHI.
Oh yeah. My opinion resonates with Professor Hosio. I have two things in mind. First thing is relevant. Always, I want to tell the basics of AI how AI achieves the capability of, like, for example, showing up some picture and saying what's on the picture, what kind of thing you provide, like neural network, and what do you mean by training the network, or what do you mean by machine learning? What exactly is learning in this case? And it's not that difficult. So if you only focus on the very basic principle, you can understand that, regardless of your specialty. So I think that's kind of important, like, it's not like miracle from nowhere, or etc. But there is some solid principle working there, which is not like, imaginary human or something, but there is a particular mathematical principle working there. And what exactly is learning? What is the limitation, etc. So that's one thing. And another thing is that, these days I've been asked many times, and many others are discussing, what should we do when we have LLM, ChatGPT, and at the classes in the university, when we do some assignments to students, of course, we cannot stop them from using ChatGPT. And many professors think that maybe we shouldn't discourage them from using them. Probably we should be able to teach them how to cleverly use, and how to have a critical thinking, and how to fully exploit the power of such systems for better performance of humans, or things like that. So, but currently we all are struggling. To say some example, in my class I did that. So I gave them an assignment and said that, yeah, you can use ChatGPT cleverly. Rather, think about how to cleverly use ChatGPT, and report on, what is your way of using that, and discuss about, the goods and bads about it, etc. So that's just a first try. But we all should think about what's the appropriate or correct way to in that direction. So what I believe is that in the end, probably our value systems, like sense of what's good or what's bad, what you like, what you hate, things like that, is a very important thing. And then based on that, you should always be able to evaluate what the system gives you. To train such capability becomes more central than previous times in schools, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience, and these are for both professors. So the question is, I wonder, would it be possible or helpful for clients to share their conversation logs with professional therapists? I imagine doing this might reduce some concerns therapists worry about the negative impacts bringing by letting clients talking to chatbots alone without the supervision of professions. I'm interested in both of your perspectives on using chatbots and as another support for mental therapy. Thank you.
That's of course trivial. How do I say? with the informed consent of the user. If the user wishes, then this should be done, definitely. And some of these online systems intended to do so, easy access to users, but then when the system detects some anomaly or strong necessity for counseling, they will raise some alert and then probably suggest the user to contact the therapist and etc. So yeah, basically in principle, that should be done, but of course based on the consent of the user, I think. What do you think?
I also think exactly, of course, with consent it should be done, and but there's also the strong division between the public and private sector here. So the private sector doesn't need to care. They offer their services to employers, and I'm not even blaming them. That's the right thing to do. They are still trying to do good work to, for example, mitigate or improve employer well-being in big companies. There's a lot of mental health companies that do this in form of, for example, mobile applications. But then in the public sector, typically in many countries, there is so strict regulation, and that's why they come 5 to 10 years after these things are already in the market. So I would assume that in the public sector, this process exactly has to be done a lot before anything gets approval to be then used as part of the healthcare systems. So the private sector goes 5 to 10 years ahead without necessarily doing this transparently, and then the public sector has to do things in its own pace, doing exactly this.
Thank you. And so Professor Hosio, for the upcoming Tohai Tokyo Oulu Human Computer Interaction Symposium or Forum, so you have been working with researchers from different cultural backgrounds. And you also mentioned earlier that different cultures may have different definitions of being well. Based on your experience, what are some interesting things you have seen, like in terms of the cultural difference in the definition or in the how people say the human-computer interaction differently from different cultural backgrounds?
Whoa, that's a tough one. How people see HEI differently from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a good answer for that.
Well, have you experienced some of the interesting things during like international collaboration or international?
Mostly we see it in our own data when we look at samples of different cultures and from different ages. So like there are different cultures who, like, for example, provide very, very lengthy and verbose answers to different questionnaires. But from a fundamental HEI perspectives, I probably do not have anything personal to share, like how do people use actually machines and so forth. Well, I do. From today, we were discussing this chatbot study, and I was very impressed to see the Japanese sample being 74 years plus minus 6 years, discussing with a robot for 7 days straight. And I find that incredibly impressive. It would be very hard for me to get participants in Finland aged 75 to discuss to a robot 7 days a row. So there is one cultural and probably also physiological difference there, because people here are in very good shape. So, but that is relevant. That is HEI at its core, like human robot interaction. It works so much better in this culture than in many most. So, as a local example.
So maybe KUNIYOSHI Sensei, can you explain more about the study, like how you recruit the the sample size of older people, and have you done the similar research among people of different age groups? Are there any difference?
Well, it's kind of a know-how, but we have several channels to that connects us to elderly participants. One is through some research organization like Gerontology Research Center. And then we get some connections with elderly community. Also, there's so-called silver human resource centers throughout the country, in different local communities. What it does is to connect anybody who wants someone to help offer you labor by paying a little bit, I mean, appropriate amount, like doing anything. And there are elderly people registered to the system. So this is just for some like part-time job, but we can use that system. I mean, talk to these organizations to recruit people for research, and of course we pay appropriate amount, but they participate. And as Professor Hosio said, in Japan, people are very positive, and elderly people are really positive about interacting with robots, AI, etc. That's one thing. But also, actually, this Nakagawa's research emphasizes on the point where how a system can maintain the relationship with the user, but what kind of interaction would sustain the interaction. So typically, when user converse with the system, people typically very quickly get bored because of the stereotypical interactions. But his system is he built a system that emphasizes not to introduce such boring things. So that's one important aspect of this technology. So so the system tries to generate interesting interactions or personalized interactions, evolving contents, so that the user is willing to interact with the system. So that's another important aspect. Yeah.
What is the next step of the study? Is it going to be applied to a bigger population for us?
Yeah, that will be real. So of course, there are many challenges for in order to make this more practical and useful, effective, and harmless. But at some point, rather than me, he plans to do some startup and then install this into society for the goods of elder people. Also, but before that, we have to work on how to integrate this with ChatGPT, etc. So far, it is not integrated, but when it's integrated, probably it's going to be more powerful, but it also becomes more complicated, so that controlling the behavior of the system will be a little more difficult. So we need further training, etc., and make sure that the system does appropriate things. But so there are a lot of things ahead. But in the future, we really want this to contribute to the elderly community.
And Professor Hosio, I have another question about crowdsourced healthcare, which is also a key topic of this presentation, today's presentation. So in my own work, we also do a lot of crowdsourcing contests in China about engaging with the sexual and gender minority groups about generating sexual health interventions or HIV prevention studies. And we use crowdsourcing strategies as a way to engage were often ignored or marginalized in the mainstream society. So how do you see how we can make sure the equality or the balanced representatives of diverse populations in using crowdsourced healthcare or crowdsourced strategies to generate health innovations or health promotion strategies?
Well, the existing marketplaces certainly are not usually nationally or statistically representative of any marginalized groups. Some of the higher paid ones, the high-end platforms might have some kind of a nationally representative sample, typically across, well, 2 genders and maybe ages. So they're not optimal for that. So we have to build specific solutions of our own. Typically, the way that, for example, how we tackle issues like this is that we build systems that are compatible for outside platform recruitment as well as inside platform recruitment. So we can get a bulk of the people from these easy to access platforms and then supplement those with people from outside the platform. So we just have to build our own software solutions that support recruitment from those populations. And of course, there is no shortcut. So then you have to do the legwork to actually reach out to the populations in order to get the participants in to donate data for these systems. So it's not easy. I don't think it's supposed to be easy either. So it's things that are hard are typically the things that, well, are worth doing. So, manual work.
So you also mentioned the project of the study of students, 1,000 students data in UK and Finland, and now maybe extending to Japan. What are the considerations of choosing the student population as the study population?
Well, the obvious one is convenience, because we are operating in the higher education community ourselves. So then, like, doing research with the higher education community seems like a natural way to, first of all, operate in an environment that we know, but also at the same time, it is a population that is in deep trouble right now, because the age class is such that typically most of the mental health disorders, they manifest around the time when people are in higher education, in college or university. And also right now, future looks unclear from the eyes of that specific cohort of people. There's like AI taking jobs, there's climate change. It's just a group of people who are now in need of maybe this kind of scalable solutions. So there's a lot of good things going on from our perspective in that sense.
That sounds very exciting. And so I think we only have like 3 minutes to the end of the webinar. And if anyone has some burning questions, please send us to the Q&A function. If not, maybe we should close today's webinar. All right. All right. Thank you, Professor Hosio, and thank you, Professor KUNIYOSHI, for joining us today's session. And I'm sure interested participants will be able to contact the professors by Googling their names and find their contact information. Thank you.
Thank you.